Most podcasters think that once they've launched their show, the hardest part is over. They can stand up, they can brush themselves off, and they can move on with growing their podcast. But here's the thing, launching isn't the finish line. It is actually the stress test that reveals whether your podcast's positioning can stand up to the competition and actually deliver the results that you want. And that is exactly why I invited fellow podcast host and PodLaunch graduate Dr. Annie Campanile to join me for this episode, because she is someone who had a textbook perfect podcast launch, but quickly realized that there were cracks in her show's positioning that were costing her listeners and was costing her conversions. But instead of clinging to what she'd built, she made the really gutsy call to rebrand her show right away. And in this episode, you're going to hear how one simple change nearly doubled her downloads within 7 days of making this underrated but important tweak. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Annie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Courtney. So glad to be here with you.
Oh, I'm so excited that you are here, mainly because, first of all, you started working with us inside of PodLaunch about 6 months ago to launch your podcast for the first time. And you followed all the steps. And your launch was beautiful. It was hugely successful by all the usual metrics, charting and downloads and listener feedback. And then you realized within a few weeks of that launch that even though you did everything right, that it could be even better. So I want to jump in right there with you. What was it that made you decide to reposition your podcast right after a really successful launch?
Okay. So the truth about me is that I am a good student. I have lots of degrees. I like to learn. I followed all the advice with PodLaunch, as you said. I loved it. However, I wanted to frame my podcast for the deeper layer of understanding of my people, the clients I talk to, the people I want to help. So I named it Heal Your Trauma, Find Your Voice, because that's kind of like my target. That's like the fairy dust that I wish I could sprinkle on everyone. What I realized is after a couple of months, really, the number of downloads for my trailer was huge and way more than the number of downloads for episodes. So I started wondering about that. Like there must be some kind of a disconnect. And what I figured out is that the more podcast episodes I created, the more my stories were about the workplace. Because as an executive coach for 20 years, that's where the stories come from. So I had to pause and ask myself, do I really want to create episodes weekly talking about deep trauma? And the answer was no, because I was starting to feel exhausted and I was telling stories, of course, changing names and other details, but telling true stories of clients who had gone through very traumatic experiences. My body was feeling all that energy and they're off having their merry lives, right? They're not there anymore. So I thought, okay, let's reassess, both for my own well-being and also because I realized there's something missing here where someone's listening to the trailer, expecting something, and then looking at my episode titles and thinking, oh, wait, maybe this isn't what I thought. I also had some feedback from leaders in an organization saying, I really love your episodes, but I'm not comfortable with the word trauma being in the title. I want to share it with people, but I don't really talk about trauma. So all of those cues made me think, you know what? My podcast is still young. I don't have a huge audience. It seems like now would be the time to shift if I'm going to.
Yes. Okay. Well, there's so much to unpack here. And I love all of it because, first of all, you paid attention to those cues. And that is something that's difficult to do when you have already spent months of time and energy and effort building something. And that sunk cost fallacy can hit us really hard where it's like, we've put in all this effort and all this energy and now I need to change it. Like, no, I don't want to change that. I don't want to redo what I've just spent time doing. And it wasn't that the first iteration of your show was bad by any means, but like you said, there was a disconnect and you were picking up on that. And this is something that, it comes up on our coaching calls. It comes up quite a bit. And I don't know that I've ever shared this here on the podcast, but it's this idea that gets passed around in the industry of how your first podcast is never going to be your last podcast. For most of us, our first podcast is a podcast we have for 6 months, 8 months, a year, maybe a couple of years. For you, it was the podcast that you had for a couple of months. And now you're like, okay, here I am needing to change this thing. So I'm curious now, we'll dig into what these changes were specifically and some of the takeaways that you gained from the experience of rebranding so quickly. But how is your podcast being received now versus how it was being received before?
What's interesting is that my overall messaging and the kinds of tools and tips I'm offering are very similar. Nothing has profoundly changed there. It's just that I've changed my language. The new name launched about a week ago, and the last week's downloads are almost double the average of the first 7 days for all the previous episodes. So that's very exciting. Drama-free teams, I think, is a name that just rolls off the tongue much better. Lots of people are comfortable with it. I've had a lot of people at the health system where I have my full-time job as an executive coach tell me, now I'm starting to listen to your podcast and I'm starting with episode 1. So they're listening to the old episodes and loving them. But the new name, the new SEO helped them realize, oh, this is for me. So it's performing much better.
Okay, so take us through some of those specific changes that you made in the language, and just kind of the through line here being the context that you have provided for people now. Even though what you're sharing in the episodes isn't all that different, the way that you're framing it is. So can you walk us through what those changes were?
Yes. Previously, the framing was everyone is walking around with some form of unhealed trauma response. So fight or flight that's not resolved for whatever reason. But what I've realized, thanks to your persistence and tenacity and patience, is they might not know that's happening. So we had so many iterations of, well, what is it that the people are consciously struggling with and consciously wanting help with? So drama in the workplace, interpersonal conflict, gossip, hurt feelings, that's something that happens all the time. I help people deal with it every day, but it didn't necessarily occur to me to focus on that until you helped me realize that. And, the name Drama-Free Teams, boy, I resisted that for weeks. You were so patient. You're like, okay, you just think about it, come back to me. And then I started floating it around to different people and like, well, what do you think about this? And their eyes lit up. They're like, oh my gosh, I need that. I need help getting, resolving trauma or drama on my team. And so that framing, I think it lands so much better for people. It feels good. It doesn't spark angst or anxiety. Whereas trauma, heal your trauma, for some people, we're like, oh gosh, are you going to expose me now? Framing it as drama-free teams and talking about just the normal everyday challenges that every normal person encounters, I think it allows people to feel much more comfortable.
Well, there's a really important distinction here that you're pointing out, because as subject matter experts, a lot of times we can talk about the root of a problem. And the person who's listening to that or receiving that message may or may not be problem aware. They might not realize that the root of the problem is causing the symptoms that they're experiencing in their life. So in this case, quite literally, the trauma is causing the drama, but what they're experiencing is the drama, maybe not even fully aware of the trauma, or they are aware of it, but they haven't taken steps to fully heal from it. And they're in some level of that journey and that process. So when we can speak to the problem and the symptoms, essentially in language that our person understands and can relate to, that's when you get those eye light up moments where they're like, oh my gosh, yes, I have drama in my workplace. Like, can you help me with that? I'm going to tune into your podcast. And it was so funny because the other day I was sitting on the sofa with my 7-year-old and we're watching this science show that he loves. And the host said, today, kids, we're going to learn about cross-polymer linking. And they had this moment in the episode where the kids just kind of look at each other and like blink, like, what is this? And she goes, we're learning about slime. And of course, the kids like erupt and cheers. They're like, slime, and the whole episode is like literally the kids covered in slime from that point forward. And I was like, this is such a relevant example because this happens nowhere more often than in podcasting when we are trying to convey a message, and truly in marketing in general, that is getting literally lost in translation. Because we are speaking to the same problem that our person's experiencing, but from a different angle or from an extra layer of depth that maybe they haven't tapped into yet. So what you've done so beautifully is that you recognize this early on, and you've made the changes that you now are seeing how it's connecting with people. And that's essentially opening the door for them to get into your world and now learn about the deeper stuff that you do talk about and can help them with as they get to know you, like you, and trust you through your podcast. So I want to know, though, let's back up a second about that resistance that you mentioned that came up for you in the process. Talk me through that. Where did that come from? And being on the other side of that now, what have some of the biggest lessons or ahas been having gone through that process and worked through that resistance, not once now, but twice in a short span of time?
Right. Oh, I am a deep person, as you know now, right? I like to swim in the deep end of the pool. And for now, 20 plus years, I've been an executive coach, mostly in health systems. And then I've had a private practice helping people work through trauma. So when I was thinking about the podcast, I really wanted to avoid living on the surface or focusing on superficial issues because I wanted to, okay, this is my chance to really help more people more efficiently get to the deeper stuff, right? So my resistance was first, I honestly could not identify for myself the more superficial, what are the problems they're consciously aware of? And second, I was worried that if I did identify those, then I would be trapping myself in superficiality, which would not work for me at all. Once I felt like you really understood me, I then relaxed more and opened up more to your suggestions. So that was helpful. And honestly, Pod Launch, I would never have done any of this without Pod Launch. So thank you. Then the more I embraced just the term drama-free teams, I spent quite a bit of time thinking about saying it. How does it feel in my mouth when I say it? How does it feel in my body? I started to have more ideas about how I could play with that and talk about different things. The other piece of this that's important is when I started, I kind of put pressure on myself to make every episode like a little compact, full workshop from start to finish. And my clients who for years been saying, gosh, Annie, I wish you had a podcast. They're like, well, we like it, but I'm not really feeling your voice. Like I don't feel like we're just hanging out. So that was a big hurdle for me. But now something has clicked. And I think it is because of this reframing of drama-free teams. Now I'm just feeling much more relaxed when I start to record. So I feel like it's going to create a whole ripple effect that's going to be great for me and for everyone else.
I love the part that you said about the more I trusted you, the more I opened up. And isn't that true in exactly the work that you do for your clients too?
Definitely.
And that just underscores, Annie, everything that we are talking about here and how we develop that trust with someone for the first time. Because whether it's in a therapeutic relationship, whether it's in a business type of transactional relationship, no matter what it is, when there is that trust transfer that needs to happen, when someone meets you cold for the first time, they don't know if they trust you yet. They don't even know if they like you yet, right? We're all kind of meeting someone like, do I like this person? Do I relate to them? Do I feel like they understand me? And all of that. And how this is so true in our listener journey too, for a new listener in particular. Because to grow a podcast, we got to get it outside of that warm audience of people who already know us, which means tapping into cold audiences who don't know us. So how do we develop that trust? And so when we're speaking about things that either they're not aware of or that they're like, oh, that's just a little much for me, or it comes off across really strong or whatever the reason might be, then it causes them to tune out rather than tune in. And this is why a lot of shows get overlooked. A lot of good shows get overlooked in favor of other podcasts that do a better job of communicating that relevance. So you're really hitting the nail on the head now. And I'm so glad that you came around, to kind of realize that because, and look, you talk about me being patient. Patience has nothing to do with it, right? Like I know that everyone who is podcasting will eventually come to these realizations in their own time. There's nothing that I can do to force that process. And the fact that you were able to come to those realizations sooner than a lot of people are able to do says a lot about your ability to trust your gut and to trust your instincts. And I want to acknowledge that in you. And I'm curious to know, how did trusting your gut in this process, especially, through this rebrand in a short period of time, help you create a show that genuinely now you are truly proud of and you feel like you can fully stand behind?
Yeah, that's so important. It really is so important. It was a very long journey for me in my life to trust my intuition, to trust my own knowing. And in this process, I noticed when I was starting to feel really exhausted and overwhelmed by the process of podcasting, I realized that I had disconnected from checking in with myself. And that's because I'm not a subject matter expert about podcasting. And I had unconsciously set aside all of my internal cues, thinking I just need to absorb more information, more education. When I paused to really ask myself, am I enjoying, actually my husband asked me, are you enjoying this? Because I was every weekend, I can't do anything. I have to do my episode. It's like, are you really enjoying this? And I had to be honest and say, no, I really enjoy it when I record the episode, and everything else I don't. That really made me pause to reflect and ask myself, well, why are you doing it? And if you really do want to keep doing a podcast, how can it become something that feeds you energetically, emotionally, that you enjoy, and also is helpful for people and interesting to them?
So good. There's so much there to really reflect on for all of us, no matter at what point you are in your podcasting journey. Because through our various seasons in life and in business, we get to these points where we go through the motions. I found myself here recently too, in the broader scope of our company, where we had achieved the vision that we set out to achieve. And we had just been kind of coasting for the last 18 months or so until this year. I picked my head up and I'm like, where are we actually going? What are we actually doing next? And I hadn't stepped back to really reflect and decide what those next steps look like. And we can easily become disconnected in the day to day and in the stuff that we're showing up. We're doing it, we're recording the episode, we're putting it out there. Okay, I'm checking the box. I'm being consistent with my podcast. The podcast isn't growing. I actually hate the podcast now. And this is what causes a lot of people to quit. So I think that even though this is something that can feel intangible, right? How do we lean into our gut and trust our intuition here? And it is a process to learning how to do that. And it is a skill to develop. It is important for us as podcast hosts to not lose sight of that, because at the end of the day, and if I can drill this into our clients' heads and those who listen to this podcast, like I say this on the show all the time, but this is the one thing that I hope people remember in listening to this show and even in working with us, is that you're the host of your podcast. So yes, I can teach you strategy. We can show you how to optimize for SEO and how to nail your messaging and how to differentiate from your competitors and how to get a marketing plan in place that you can scale over the course of your podcast and all those things. But at the end of the day, you get to call the shots because you are the host of your show. And I think that is a power that we have to take full ownership of. Taking that ownership of that power inherent within us is a choice. And it's one that you have taken. So for someone listening right now, Annie, who maybe is having the same gut inkling that you had, who spent a lot of time building what they've built with their podcast, and they're struggling to just, up and let go of that, but they're also feeling pulled to move in a new direction, what advice would you give them?
That's a great question. And as you were sharing, I was thinking more about your question about intuition. So this is answering that question as well as the one before. If someone is in that state of, gosh, I'm not sure if I want to keep going in the same direction I'm going, it's not feeling quite right. Notice the thoughts that are going through your head. What are you telling yourself? And then ask yourself, whose thought is that? Is this a thought from fear? Is it something I've been told from someone else? Like, hey, you started it, you better not stop. Is it your own voice? Now, how do you know that? For me, how I know it's my own voice is that when I listen to it, my body calms down. Or I might cry. Like energy moves instead of feeling stuck and like rigid or like I want to run away. If I pay attention to a voice in my head, and then I notice how do my emotions respond? How does my body respond? And I start to feel a little bit more certain or a little bit more grounded, that's my cue that that's my voice. If it increases my anxiety, then I start to get a little more curious, like, okay, well, whose voice is this? And then I have a choice. Am I going to adopt that thought? You better not stop, you started. Or can I say, thanks for your suggestion. I'm going to give that back to you. I'm not going to adopt that anymore. I'm going to choose to believe something different, which is I have the freedom to choose. And my intuition is telling me it's time to look in a different direction or take a little bit of a different angle with this.
Such a skill to learn too. That's not easy. It's easier said than done. When we're in the moment and we want to check the box in our brain, we want to figure out what the next thing is. And our brain is seeking answers because our brains are wired for that. But sometimes in this podcasting journey, you're going to find yourself in these moments where you're at a pivot point and you have to make a decision moving forward. And I backtrack and say, not even a decision, because that verb is frozen in time and actually can feel stuck in its own energy, but to decide what your next step is, and to also just remember that you have the freedom to change your mind.
That's right. I definitely told myself that repeatedly. And I'm sure you told me as well. But it was like, I gave myself permission to change my mind. Definitely the sunk cost angst was in there for me. It was a problem for me. But I also have given myself permission to have fun with this. So like the new cover art, I love it. It makes me so happy to look at it. I love the colors. I love everything you did with it. And I'm like, I want stickers. I want a t-shirt. Like I didn't feel that way before.
Oh, I love that so much. And see, that's the thing. This is supposed to bring us joy. For those who are listening to this show who are heart-centered and committed to their podcast, as 99.999% of our listeners are, we're doing this for a bigger reason and a bigger purpose. This is not just to have another content channel for the sake of having another content channel and enlarging our reach and our footprint in the world. This is because we have a message we want to share. That message means something to us. It matters to us. And when the actual act of podcasting begins to take the joy from what we got into podcasting for in the first place, to share that message, then it doesn't serve its purpose. And so we have to be willing to step back and open to the possibility of change in order to find that joy again. And this doesn't mean just going out and like changing your cover art every 2 weeks and changing the name of your show every 2 weeks. Your listeners will be pretty confused, but in the moments where it matters most. And I've reached these pivot points many times on my journey where I was like, we need to move in a new direction with the podcast. And then even saying new direction is not even the most accurate. It's simply a refinement of what was before. It's an evolution of what was before. And I've seen that evolution in you, Annie, and I'm so excited to see where this show goes for you. It's been a joy to witness your podcasting journey. I'm excited for you, and not just for the message you have to share, but just in gratitude for the work that you are doing in the world to help those leaders out there who are struggling with trauma, but they don't know it. But they've got a lot of drama surrounding what they're doing in their everyday lives. And the fact that you're out there helping them with it, that you haven't given up, says so much about you and who you are. So thank you for being here to share your story with us today.
Thank you, Courtney. Thanks for helping me.
So now you know, rebranding doesn't mean you're starting over. It means you're evolving, and that is a good thing. Because evolution is the only way to actually protect your show from failure. Because the podcast landscape is constantly going to be changing. We see it all the time. It constantly is changing, and it constantly forever will be changing. But when your podcast has the right positioning in place, the right listeners are going to be able to find you. And even better, those listeners will instantly know that your show is for them. So if you've been podcasting for 6 months or more, you are still stuck in less than 200 download per episode jail, and you can't figure out why. Or if you've been podcasting for any length of time, but you haven't yet generated any revenue from your show, whether that be through sponsors and advertisers or through clients and customers, then your next step is really simple. Click the link in the show notes and reach out so we can help you make sure that you have the right foundation in place for your show inside of PodLaunch. And then don't go anywhere, because in the next episode, you're going to get a little taste of just how fast you can see progress with a podcast growth team in your corner. We've got a special guest joining us who is asking the question that every podcaster asks themselves at 2 a.m., which is, I feel like I'm doing everything right. I don't get it. Why isn't my show growing? What am I missing? We are going to get brutally honest about what keeps most podcasters from growing, regardless of how much time and effort you're putting into creating your content, and how fixing this can turn your analytics dashboard into real life proof that your show is finally reaching the right people. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.